Welcome to Requity Insights, a channel dedicated to documenting our journey to 100 world-class communities.
So welcome to today's episode of Requity Insights. My name is Velez, and I'm joined by my co-host and the CEO of the Requity Group, Marma. Today, we have a very special episode for you. We are joined by Paul Bambei. Paul is the president and CEO of the National Association of RV Parks and Campgrounds, based in Centennial, Colorado, just south of Denver. Paul has been with RV for over 12 years now, dating back to November 2010.
Very excited for today's show, and we are eager to hear from Paul more on the state of the RV industry, as this has been a space that has really been the majority of our focus for the last year and a half, and we are excited to be participants of a little bit more on ARVC. ARVC is a leader of the outdoor hospitality industry. It is the only national association dedicated to representing the interests and needs of private RV parks and campgrounds in the US and Canada. We ourselves are members of ARVC, and we have so far gained a lot of value from the content that they've been able to share with us, both via online as well as through some of the live events that we've been able to participate in, and we found it a great experience. They currently have over 3,000 members, and they continue to grow as more and more people are becoming interested in the industry. So thanks for joining us, Paul.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. If I can, Dylan, I'd like to spend just a minute on my background. I come from the private sector prior to joining as ARVC's president back in 2010. And I've kind of seen a dress rehearsal of the cycle that I think the campground industry is in today from my previous background, which was ownership and operation of private cable TV systems across the United States. That may sound like a strange parallel to you, but it followed a lot of the same pattern, very entrepreneurial, privately owned cable systems back in the day. And in the late 90s, early 2000s, the corporations and the private equity guys started seeing the value due primarily to the predictable cash flow that we were throwing off as an industry. And so they started coming in and acquiring. And I think that's what's happening today in the private campground industry. Obviously, a lot of entrepreneurs are bowing out at significant cap rates to enjoy the afterlife. And I think that's great. I think the industry has really made its mark financially on Wall Street and beyond. So that's the way I size it up. I think it's a great time to be an investor. In terms of ARVC, just to expand on that a little bit, we have 3,000 members, as you were mentioning, and we're 65 years old as an association. But one of the things I've tried to do culturally is really treat it quite a bit different than most trade associations. I've hired a team of very talented people through the years. We take an EOS attitude toward the business. If you're familiar with it, it's the entrepreneurial operating system. Books have been written about it. And that's kind of how we operate. We don't rely on bureaucracy too much. We like to think that we are quick with our decisions. And you got to be quick in this era. So much is changing. So our value is really based on 4 different principles, if you will. We save our members a lot of money through our benefit portfolio. We have some major brands in there. Approximately 150 vendors are part of it. But when you look at the savings that you can realize from brands like Kubota and John Deere in the yard lawn maintenance category, Sherwin-Williams with paint, Club Car with golf carts. These are all commodities that most campgrounds use at some time or another. And then we have something we're very proud of. It's kind of the one-of-a-kind music licensing program that we centrally manage. And that's, again, if you put music in the public domain, you need a license or you're potentially infringing upon copyright law. So we've kind of worked through all that, and we know how to centrally management, as I said, and it's quite a program. There's nothing like it in the country. We do education, continuing education through our national school. We do government advocacy as the third leg on the stool, do some great work to kind of beat back the regulators and the legislators who are trying to throw trouble at our industry. Last year alone, we reviewed 16,000 legislative and regulatory issues that we were catching at the very early stages. And then lastly, we provide great networking. We do a conference every year in November. It's the largest one in the industry. It's coupled with a trade show, and this past year we held it in Orlando and we had record attendance. So I just encapsulated a lot of work that we do inside of 5 or 10 minutes, but that's generally why it's a good thing to be a member of ARVC.
Fantastic. So yeah, I definitely see you guys do a lot for the industry as a whole with promoting the advocacy, education, and networking, all of which we've already seen benefits of, and I imagine we'll go more into that during the state of the industry. And there are certain pieces within there that I definitely am excited to be able to dive into further after. But if you want to go ahead and start with giving us your state of the industry presentation, we'd love to hear about that and build off that.
All righty. Yeah, I thought this first slide would just give listeners a 30,000 foot level of how the industry is performing overall. And when I say the industry, I talk about the outdoor recreation industry. Camping is certainly a part of that, and we are measured by the U.S. Department of Commerce each year. The statistics I'm going to be sharing with you today are calendar year 2021 numbers. And as you can see, outdoor recreation is performing at $862 billion economic impact on the economy. It's bigger than mining, utilities, farming, ranching, chemical products. This is what gets us in the door with the US Congress and the people that we lobby with in Washington, D.C. There was a time, even in my tenure, where getting a foothold in front of senators and US congressmen was very difficult. But when you have numbers like this that open the door for you, you tend to get their attention. The next slide is a little bit of an expanded treatment of that large multi-billion-dollar number. It represents 1.9% of the gross domestic product of the United States. And when you look at the statistics, this represents 4.5 million jobs. That's like 3% of all American jobs. So camping and the outdoor recreation economy is clearly an important economic driver in this country. And if I can move into the next slide that talks more specifically about the camping industry, it's a very resilient industry. And I have some data here to point that out. The uncertain times that we're in right now are really hammering a lot of industries, but camping is not one of them. We went into the pandemic strong. We weathered the pandemic extremely well, and we have come out of the pandemic in the years 21, 22 even better. Here are some comparative stats to prove that. Campers spent $44 billion in 21, and revenues were 33% over 2019 pre-pandemic levels. The second bullet here, 94 million camping households were up 20% over 2019. And when you consider that the US household count is about 130 million, you do the math, 70% of every household in this country is a camping household. That's fantastic. We represented 40% of all leisure trips in 2021. And that's compared to theme parks, leisure boat trips, any kind of outdoor recreation that used to dominate camping is no longer the case. And then most important, I think, 62% of leisure travelers prefer camping over other forms of recreation in a down economy. And this is research-based. So what this kind of adds up to mean is that we are affordable and reliable. People who are a little scared of leaving their home and traveling long distances, they don't have that fear when it comes to camping. In fact, as you'll see in a slide coming up, the majority of campers stay relatively close to home. So when we have things like FAA computer shutdowns with air travel and the crazy things that went on over the holidays with Southwest Airlines and people waiting in airports and not being able to get to their destination, camping really doesn't share that kind of issue. And I think that's just going to be more and more important to the American traveler and consumer as time goes on. The next slide talks about some future trends that are very positive for the industry. This is not just a one and done in time that we're enjoying such great response by the American public these days. This has been actually going on for a decade or more, and it's really come into its own in these last couple of years, triggered by the pandemic. But all the signs are that this is going to continue for the foreseeable future. And I can say that with confidence because, again, the research says that 70% of campers are millennial or Gen Z. I'm not one of those people. I'm a baby boomer, but the standard thinking, I believe, has been that these folks that are born in the late 90s to 2010 era, if you're talking about Gen Z, don't have money. Well, these people are entering the job market in big numbers, and they're scoring pretty good jobs that allow them to recreate. And we're seeing it. They're coming to the campgrounds, which is phenomenal. 41% of first-time campers will continue next year. Again, this is from our most recent surveys and research. We've already looked at the 23 year that we're now in, and we saw that 11% of all bookings had been in the books in the fourth quarter of 22. So they're not just deciding spur of the moment, hey, I'm going to go take a camping trip. They're actually planning for it well in advance. And I believe that's because the law of supply and demand is at work here. The campers are seeing that if they don't get in with an advance reservation, they might be left out. It's that popular. So it's a great, great problem to have. The next bullet is 35% of people that are camping these days are of color. And that's a 23% shift since 2012. People of color just didn't camp that much a decade ago. They were not interested. And again, the pandemic, because it forced people to be inside and forced people to start socializing again as a family, I think it just woke up a lot of people that, hey, we need to get out and recreate. What's a good way to do that? Camping is a good way to do that. And people of color figure that out perhaps more than any other demographic. The last bullet, first-time RV buyers jumped from 44% to 54%. between the years 2019 and 2021. Anybody who's following our industries have seen that RV sales have gone through the roof. Last year was a record year at 572,000 units sold. It's pared back a little bit this year, but this year was still the third best in the history of RV manufacturing. There was some normalization in the fourth quarter of 22 where sales started dipping a bit year over year, but again, third best year ever. It landed somewhere around 400, and I have that number written down. It's at 472,000 this year through November. So still a great year. People are buying RVs in droves, and what's changing that sector of the industry a bit, actually by quite a lot, is the type of RV that they're buying. It's no longer the big 40-foot rig that we all remember in our parents' day. The younger people especially are moving much more toward Class B, Sprinter vans, those kind of more mobile and nimble RV types that allow people to still live in them, but they get better gas mileage. They can go off grid if need be. And it's just a different way of travel in an RV that it used to be just 10 years ago. The last slide is the data that I pulled from our ARVC 2022 generational camping report. And, it's the report itself is fantastic because it's one of the few, maybe the only reports in the industry that surveys campers themselves, consumers. And it helps us understand and helps our members understand as owners of campgrounds what's on the mind of the consuming public. Certainly, electric vehicles are on their mind. We saw this trend developing a year and a half, 2 years ago. And our research says 56% of campers say EV charging is important or very important to their decision on where to camp. I'll be real honest with you, our industry is not prepared for the onslaught of EV that I think is coming at us. Infrastructurally, our campgrounds need to be able to charge, whether it's an RV or a pickup truck or a Tesla. It doesn't matter. People are coming to our campgrounds in electrically charged vehicles. So we need to be able to satisfy them and keep them moving across the country. I think one of the things that really caught my eye this past year, the state of California, and I think Washington and Oregon followed suit. Their governors have said by 2035, combustion engines will no longer be allowed in their state in terms of manufacture. So they're switching completely over to EV by 2035. And you just look at the trends that are coming out these days. EV vehicles are just multiplying enormously. And these are people that are going to be camping in our campgrounds. So we're trying to educate and inform at ARVC. We've held several panel discussions on it at our last 2 conferences. And our suppliers are really starting to gear up to provide equipment that makes camping at the campground possible if you want to charge on the site that you're staying at. But it's an evolution, and it's going to take a few years to get it where it needs to be. And I hope we can stay in step with the proliferation of EVs in general. Standards, the second bullet. We don't have standards in our industry. These are operating standards. And I think about a year ago, we decided as an industry led by ARVC that we were kind of sitting ducks for regulators that really wanted to start making life very difficult for us, especially with the influx of new camping consumers coming in. These people are very social media conscious. And if they have a bad experience at a campground, it takes them 2 seconds to post it online. And when negative news starts traveling via the internet, enterprising government officials, it doesn't take them long, and I learned this from my previous career. It doesn't take them long to see this as a social issue that they can ride and get political votes with. So you got to have something in place that will relieve the pressure if that were to take place. And I think what we've developed is impressive. We're not quite ready to roll it out yet. We're not even sure that we're going to call them standards, because that has a certain definitional negative tone to it that we're not sure we want to impose on people. These are going to be basic guidelines that are voluntary for the campground owner to choose to apply or not. And it will create a blueprint for any campground owner, but especially new people coming into the industry that are owning campgrounds for the first time, to get answers on things like health and safety and maintenance. And we actually have about 11 different categories that we focused on. And I think because it is voluntary and because it will take time to implement for some, this is not going to be a punitive thing in any way, shape, or form. We just want to lift the image of our camping industry in the eyes of the consumer. That's what this is all about. So we're pretty pleased with it. As you see here, 99%, according to the consumers that we surveyed, said that standards are important. And 89% said they'd be willing to pay more if they knew those standards were in place. The economy, the third bullet, and the community spend of a campground. This is what I was alluding to earlier. We've learned from our research that the median distance from home traveled is only 179 miles. So people are sticking pretty close to their backyards when they camp. Inflation doesn't seem to be impacting our industry in any significant way yet. We know that the price of gas has gone up considerably in the last year. And what we've learned is that, yes, 40% of campers are traveling less frequently and 35% are traveling shorter distances. But the important thing is that they're still camping. They're still out there. They're just not going as far and staying closer to home when they do it. So I think the lesson learned here is that if you're a campground owner, market to your median range of 200 miles or less away from your campground. Market heavily, because that's where your business lies. We've learned also from our research, and this again is one of those statistics that I don't see anywhere else, but we've proved it now in our iterations of this generational camping report. People spend $50 per person per day when they're at any campground across the country. That's the median spend. So quick math there, almost $300 a day for a family of four. And this can be used very effectively at the local government level. Whenever you're trying to get a permit passed or any kind of regulatory need that you might have, and a councilman or a county commissioner says, well, you guys don't contribute much to our local economy. I'm not sure I want to give you this permit. Use this statistic and these figures to prove that, yes, we are important and we are contributing in a big way. The last bullet here, and then we'll open it up for questions. There's been a lot of talk about the infrastructure bill that the Biden administration has put forth, and how a lot of that money is trickling over to the public campground sector. I think it's good for outdoor recreation in general when everybody can enjoy camping at all levels, whether it's public campgrounds or private campgrounds. We represent the private campground industry. So we look at the money that's going in to those public campgrounds with a bit of a, hey, it's not really a fair playing field because they're being subsidized with taxpayer money. Whereas the private campground industry obviously is coming out of the hard sweat and pockets of the entrepreneurs and the owners that are really on the line for making a profit without any kind of support from the government. But I was really encouraged to see from our research that when you look at general camper preferences, 72% feel that private campgrounds are where it's at. That's where the camper likes to go. And it makes common sense because when you do the comparisons, we have the richer set of amenities that the publics just don't have yet. Anyway, we have the things that people go to our campgrounds to enjoy. So I don't think we're in any great danger of seeing public campground competition in the foreseeable future. I don't think it's going to eat into our registration scrolls. I would like to work with the US government to kind of coexist. And when they see at their opening gates that they have no vacancy, it'd be great if they would point them to the nearest private campground down the road. They have so many rules in place that don't make that an easy endeavor. But that's one of the things ARVC does. We try to break down the barriers to make camping a good thing for everybody. And so far, it's working pretty well. So that's generally what I wanted to share. I'm happy to answer any questions that you all have.
Well, first and foremost, thanks, Paul, for that insightful state of the industry. I think that those figures are very optimistic for the RV campground industry as a whole. We'd really like to begin by asking you your general thoughts regarding 2023 and just kind of the industry moving forward. You can give us some insight on that.
Yeah, I think 2023 for the campground owner is going to be a very good year. All the indicators, the leading indicators say that bookings are going to be there. The one thing that we hear often is we just don't have enough supply of camping sites. And our research, while it will never satisfy the detractors, but I think our research says we've been averaging around 8,000 new sites being expanded into the base of sites over the past several years. That equates to about 7% of the sites that are out there. So it's not a shameful growth statistic at all.
It's 80,000.
Say again?
That's 80,000 additional sites. 8,000 additional sites per year.
Yeah.
Okay.
When you weigh it against the private campground sites that are out there, we have about 6,000 campgrounds and about 1 million sites within those campgrounds. So I misquoted myself. I'm sorry. 80,000 is the number of new sites, and that's equates to the 7.6% of growth. So yeah, the manufacturers are always pressing us to build more. And ARVC, we promote that kind of growth because when you look at the return on investment, whether it's a park model or a pull-through site that costs X, usually the payback is within 2 years or less. So if you're looking at it from a capital return on investment standpoint, you'd be out there as a campground owner expanding as much as you can. And I think that's generally what's happening. There is a finite amount of real estate that they can expand with in many cases. So that's what drags the median down a bit. You just have limitations. But for the campground owner that has acres upon acres or is ready to buy an adjacent plot of land that will give him the expansion capability, I see them out there doing that. So I think that's part of my answer to you, that growth is still going to happen, and new campgrounds are coming out every day. I just saw a statistic from one of the franchising companies that they're expecting 30 new park builds or acquisitions in 2023. That's great. I just think it's going to continue to be very positive.
What do you see as the biggest risks to campground owners, operators, investors? I know looking at last year, we saw there was initially the threat of gas prices, though you said it seemed to stomach it fairly well. Then we also saw increasing on the cost side, and I think payroll and utilities were probably the two big line items that we've seen going up at levels probably higher than forecasted. From your perspective, what do you see as the biggest threats, and what can owner operators do to hedge themselves best against those threats?
Well, number one is labor shortage, and we're no different than most industries around the country that are service oriented. Labor has just been in such short supply that it's made it very difficult for the owner of a private campground. I've heard many stories this past year or two about owners that used to manage their business from their desks. And I know there's not a lot of those, but you know what I'm saying. They didn't do the dirty work of picking up trash or worrying about the sewage or working the front desk at the reception office. More and more of them are having to do that. And it's because they just don't have the arms and legs of labor to help them do what those chores used to be performed with. So I don't have a quick answer for that. I know ARVC has tried to assist. We have a job posting site that's less than a year old, where we basically have made it easy with a one-stop shop purchase to get on 7 or 8 different job posting sites at one very insignificant fee that is paid to us. And some are taking advantage of that, some are not. We used to, in this industry, be able to hire employees from abroad with short-term visas. A lot of that has been shut down. There are no easy answers to this problem. I think the wage scale is going to have to adjust to attract people that are sitting on the sidelines. I've seen research that says people coming out of college are not attracted to the hospitality industry because it just doesn't pay enough. We'll see. Another thing that I think is a risk, and we definitely encountered this during the pandemic, is we were not viewed as a non-essential business back then. And as a result, many governors in their executive orders shut our businesses down all across the country. And we learned a lot from that experience. So what we've done is we sourced where that was coming from. And it turned out that it was coming from a little known agency called the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency back in DC. It was formed by President Trump at the time. And what they do is they basically hold the keys for determining which businesses are essential and which ones are not. So ARVC, in collaboration with KOA, went to work in DC, and we were able to change our classification with CISA. We are no longer in a category that we used to be in called outdoor events. We're now in a lodging commercial facilities sector. And that was really, really important because that's where we needed to be considered an essential business. And when you look at the just, this past couple weeks in California as one example, and I could pick Florida with the hurricanes, but I'll choose California because they're undergoing some very severe weather with the flooding that's coming in on the coast. They could declare, absent of this declaration that we were able to get through, they could declare campgrounds to be non-essential and shut them down again. But with this in place, that would most likely not happen, because the governors of the states, when they wrote their executive orders, they were cutting and pasting directly from the CISA language. They were relying on it very heavily. So we didn't have the classification we needed back in 2020. We have it now. So I guess I'm talking about a risk that was present a couple of years ago that I don't think is going to be present going forward due to the work that we've done there.
That makes a lot of sense, and we definitely feel the same about the payroll, just the ability to attract top talent. Labor needs to be one of the biggest challenges as owner operators, and definitely an area that we try to put a lot of focus into to just ensure that we have the guest experience that we like to at all of our campgrounds. So I think it will take a little bit of a paradigm shift, especially for owners that have been in the industry for a long time, to be able to sort of adjust rates and the offering to a point that is competitive. And when it comes to your point regarding government regulation, similar to what you discussed on the essential business piece, which we think is a huge win for all of us as campground owners. I know you have also more recently went into what you mentioned, possibly not using the word standardizing, but coming up with sort of a template of operating procedures that us campground owners can use to be able to run our day-to-day business, to give a customer a more consistent experience as a guest, and to be able to give them a sense of comfort that they're booking with someone that is following this set of operating procedures to ensure that they have the the safety and the experience that they are hoping towards. And we think that was a very strategic, smart decision on your part, and should be beneficial to all of us, as that effectively is us as an industry. I believe the way you describe it is it's self-regulating ourselves to be able to avoid having anyone come in and take more maybe extreme, put more drastic regulations in place that could be detrimental to us as owners and could even be detrimental to the customers. So you want to maybe speak towards that? Because I believe your past career had something to do with that. So maybe, why you think this is so important, and maybe just to expand upon the vision you have for what we could do using the system.
Yeah, I'll share a quick story that illustrates how bad it can get. We were an owner operator of several cable TV systems throughout the country, and in particular in the state of Tennessee, and even more so in the western part of Tennessee. We were constantly being called in front of the city council about rate increases that we were imposing. And the cable industry was kind of known for that, so shame on us. But the industry just kept pushing. Well, at the time, and I'm talking about 1992-ish, there was a senator from Tennessee by the name of Al Gore. Senator Al Gore, was really disappointed that his grandmother, who lived in one of the cable systems, it wasn't ours, but it was a cable system in Western Tennessee, was very distraught about the constant rate increases that were coming out in her community. And she complained to her son. He saw it as a populist issue. He was running along with Bill Clinton at the time to be president, vice president, and it became the number one issue that they ran on. I kid you not. And they turned it into a regulatory business that the US government jumped into and began imposing all their different regulations on our industry, I distinctly remember a stack of forms, and I'm not exaggerating, they were 2 feet tall, that every quarter we had to submit to the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC. And it might seem like an extreme example, but it's a very real example. And I could count other industries that have been caught with their pants down as well. And boy, once you get hit by a regulator, there's no turning back.
So my next question, we make it a point on the show to educate our listeners, as some of them may not be campers themselves and may not have fully experienced the different types of campgrounds that are out there. One point we often educate on is the difference between being sort of a seasonal camper or having sort of an annual site agreement versus being more of a short-term or transient camper. And our portfolio right now is majority long-term sites that have generally annual site agreements in place. And then we also do have about 30% or so roughly short-term sites, some campgrounds being purely short-term, some being long. Do you see any general trends in the industry when it pertains to short-term camping experiences versus longer-term stays?
Yeah, I think it really depends a lot on where you are located in the country. We see many more transient campgrounds as a trend in the northern climates, just because you have to shut down usually around Columbus Day. So it's a shorter season, and the rates kind of take advantage of the people that are willing to pay for the shorter stay. You move farther south, and you have people that want to stay for 6 or 12 months at a time. And that becomes more of an opportunity to just lock down predictable revenue for that length of time. And there's no one pattern that says there are more transients than not, but I think generally in the North, you have more of it. We have to be careful though, because the definition of a campground, and this was something that came to light back in 2014. It needs to be transient habitation. When you start looking like a permanent residence, with the mail coming to that address for a 12-month period of time, that's when government regulators start saying, wait a minute, even though there are wheels on that park model, these people have stayed for a lot longer than a normal camper would. And what I'm alluding to in 2014, you might not remember it because I don't know how long you've been in the industry, but we were being challenged by HUD, Housing and Urban Development Agency in DC, who said, a park model is starting to look a lot like a mobile home. And they were using the footprint of the park model as their basis for reclassifying it as a mobile home. And if they had gotten their way, our whole park model industry would have been regulated by HUD. We fought it, and we actually fought it back and won, so that today that's not the case. But it's just a point that I think is important to note, that you want to respect the rules of what a campground really is. It's a place where people come and enjoy the outdoors, and they spend sometimes 2 weeks to a month doing that. But when it starts to look too much like a permanent residence, it takes on a whole different definition in the eyes of Washington, D.C. regulators.
Yeah, that's a great point. And to provide further clarification for listeners that aren't as familiar, we with the long-term sites, generally, these are still being used for recreational use. So they usually have like approved primary residence elsewhere, and they're usually not allowed to get their mail sent to the campground. And that is all like crystal clear in the site agreement that this is a place that they can come if they're tired of driving around, hauling around their RV every weekend, and they just want a place they can park it and keep it year round and come on the weekends and build community. This is a place for that. So that's the majority of when we talk about long-term campgrounds, that's generally what it is something that either functions more seasonally or in certain parts of the country, it could be a year-long agreement.
Good. Yeah, you're doing it right. On the subject of government advocacy work that we do, I mentioned 16,000 bills that we reviewed just in the last year. And that keeps us on our toes. And it's a very reactive responsibility. When we hear about something bubbling up, we try to pounce on it very quickly. And we work with our state partners to try to put those fires out. But there's a proactive side of it too. And I just mentioned one of those with CISA. But another form of proactive advocacy has been our work at the state level to impose what is called inherent risk legislation. You may not be familiar with the term, but it basically means if a campground resident is not a resident, but a campground customer is walking in the woods and they happen to step into a rabbit hole and twist their ankle. States that do not have inherent risk law on the books will allow frivolous lawsuits to come at the campground owner. And usually they're at, a minimum of $25,000, and they can get to be much more. So what this inherent risk legislation does is prevent those frivolous lawsuits from moving forward. And we've been very successful in a half dozen states so far of passing that legislation. We're working on one right now, kind of similar, with the American Disabilities Act and the websites that are being owned by disingenuous lawyers, I guess is the best way to put it. People that are looking to make a fast buck, and we don't have good law on the books that prevents people from suing campgrounds that don't have their ADA rules in full compliance. And again, it's creating quick and dirty lawsuits in the court system because there are no controls over these people that are out there looking to make the quick buck. So what we're trying to do is pass US legislation that would give our industry a 90-day grace period to cure whatever ADA issue could be coming up. And that's important because there are a lot of rules around ADA and it's hard to stay on top of all of them. And it's just a crime when one of them is being violated and some enterprising lawyer catches on to it and hauls you into court on a moment's notice. There's no right to cure. So that's something that we're going to be pushing very hard on in 2023, now that there's a more favorable House of Representatives climate that wasn't there before this new House came into play in January. We have the right people, I think, willing to carry the ball for our industry, and we'll see how that goes. But that's another way that we proactively look out for our members.
That's great. And a lot of sort of segues well into my next question, then I'll pass it over to Lewis. With the ADA rules, that's a prime example of something that would probably come into play with a campground that was built 20, 30 plus years ago and just does not follow modern day zoning, ordinances that are being put into place across the country. So generally these campgrounds are sort of outdated, and a lot of times they're just grandfathered in to place. And when you think about 80,000 additional sites coming online, and you think about this new wave of campers with millennials and Gen Z, and just the additional diversity that we're seeing coming to play, and work from home being more prevalent than ever before, it sort of puts us in a position now where a lot of campgrounds are becoming sort of obsolete, or they're becoming outdated and no longer meeting modern day demand. So my question is, what can campground owners do? Where can they invest, and what can they do to be able to remain relevant and competitive with the modern day standards and bring themselves sort of up to modern day?
Well, the ADA rules that are written are pretty fair, really. They don't expect you to make an overnight change toward immediate compliance of all the things that you have to have in place. What's important to them is that you keep a record of any improvements that you know you have to make, and you show a timeline on either when you're going to be finished with the work that needs to be done or the equipment that needs to be installed. And if you can't do it quickly, you show them what your timeline is, so that you are showing a story of progress. We have on our website the information you need to know on how to do this. And one of our staff members, Jeff Sims, has been deeply involved in ADA work for the last decade. He knows all there is to know about what you need to do to comply. We have on our website, arvc.org, that again show any campground owner that feels like they might be in jeopardy how to get back in line quickly with what you need to know and do. So that's the answer. People don't always like it. You know, there was an issue that cropped up very early on in the 2012-13 era where you had to have a pool lift to lower people into your pool and out if they were handicapped. And that was about a $6,000 purchase that campgrounds just didn't want to comply with, but it was the law and they had to. So we went out and struck a great deal to discount the chair lift, the pool lift, and we walked people through all the ins and outs of why it was needed. And that's just one ADA example of the past that was, front and center. And there will be others. It's not going to go away. So the best advice is just understand what you need to do, show your logbook of how you're progressing, and make sure you are progressing, because it's terrible fines that can come your way if you're not.
That's great. Paul, I want to kind of stay on the same topic, but just going more towards the physical campgrounds themselves. With this changing demographic of the average camper and just an influx of new campers that have come into the industry as of late, what do you think are the main amenities, or how has the campground itself changed, both physically and as an experience, now that we've got this new wave of campers and this new average camper?
That's a great question. The whole sub-industry of glamping has come about primarily because the consumer, especially the younger consumer, demanded it. And so I think when you look at the accommodation profile of most campgrounds, you're going to see and are seeing more glamping units, more park models, lesser tent camping sites. Those are going to be used to create the bigger revenue driving sites of RV and park model and glamping. So it's changing in that way physically, and it's more economically rewarding when it changes in that way. You'll still have the diehard campground owners that just want to offer tent camping. It's how they started, perhaps, years and years ago. And that's fine. They're happy with it. The people who use those sites are happy with it, obviously. It's just not going to drive their revenue upward like these other forms of accommodation could.
How have you seen the evolution of like Wi-Fi, for example, Paul? Like, is this something that you're seeing evolving, and how are we kind of going about trying to get, these campgrounds more connected?
Well, that's an interesting conversation. I would have told you 5 years ago that Wi-Fi was the number one requested amenity on campgrounds, especially noted when Wi-Fi wasn't being offered by a campground. In today's era, it falls way down on the list of requested amenities because it's there. It has saturated the campground industry so much in the last several years that it doesn't seem to be the issue that it was 5 years ago. Now, if Wi-Fi goes out or if the bandwidth is restricted, yeah, it becomes an issue pretty quickly. But I think campground owners have done a really good job of seeing how important this has been, and they've found their solution. They realize that the workforce has become much more virtual. People are working out of their RVs and park models like never before, and they demand that Wi-Fi be there and be working. So they've taken the path of least resistance by making sure that Wi-Fi is operating like it should. And if they didn't have it before, I think they've realized they need it. Yeah. So we do in our research, we actually rank the amenities, and we don't do it. We organize the data, but one of the questions we ask is rank your amenities from most popular to least, and that really is an interesting year-over-year change when you see what people are requiring and requesting. It's changed quite a bit, actually, and I think people are becoming more mobile from the campground. The requests for things like e-bikes and trails and water amenities, pools and things of that nature has grown tremendously over the last few years. So that kind of has removed Wi-Fi from the top of the list.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I know you touched a little bit on the EV subject. And, down the road, obviously, we're thinking that there probably could be EV RVs, but even just like as a tow vehicle right now, how important do you see that newer campgrounds or even like the more resort style ones begin to demo the topic of EV charging stations? And is this a topic that ARVC is working with vendors to try to provide a resource to operators for?
Absolutely. Yep. There's two ways to go. You can put a standard level 2 charger in front of your property, and it will be a labor intensive amenity because much like propane tank filling, you're going to have to be out there monitoring the usage of that charger. You're going to have some rules in place for campground travelers to either use it or not use it if they're not staying at the campground. That's one way to go. I tend to favor a different solution where you build a 50 amp generator on your site, put it at the front of the site. And I didn't mean generator, I meant charger, just a normal 50 amp plug-in, and let it, it won't be level 2 quality, but you let it charge overnight on your site. We know of campground owners who are doing this today, and they're very happy with that solution. They have total control. It becomes an amenity that keeps that camper within the grounds of the campground, and they're charged up and ready to go in the morning. One of the problems with the level 2 chargers is that they take up to 4 hours to charge a normal EV battery. So you get a line of people that build up outside of your gate that has to be monitored. And I think you're going to have some unhappy people out there because the line gets to be pretty long. The other solution that I mentioned, there are no lines. You just have a person staying at a site who can plug in at that site, wake up in the morning and be gone.
Yeah.
And you can surcharge that too.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
We had some panels on this subject at our conference in Orlando in November, and they were very warmly received because I think people are looking for answers, and one of our jobs is to create the toolbox for people to use. So yes, we've scored discounts from vendors that are in this sector of the industry. We have diagrams that show people how to set the site up for electrification. It's all right there, and it's on our website. I was surprised in talking to you all preliminarily that you aren't aware of all the resources that are available to you as a member on arvc.org. I really encourage people to get inside the site and really understand the benefits that are there waiting for them. We haven't talked about our music licensing program at all, but boy, if you are not part of our music licensing program, you are paying top dollar to protect yourself against copyright. And our discount is up to 50% off rate card. And the best part of it is once you sign up for the upcoming calendar year, you are fully protected from any of these licensing companies from knocking on your door and giving you grief. That's part of our contract with them. So it's probably the biggest nuisance factor that is out there. And you can protect yourself and avoid it by just getting your music through ARVC.
That's great.
Remember too that we are not the policing agent. We're just administering the program. But if you are caught and are charged with copyright liability infringement, they can, by law, come after you for up to $150,000 per song that you have violated. And they have a very sophisticated means of catching their evidence. It's called Shazam. They just hold up a mobile phone and it identifies any music that's being played on your property, and they can use that as evidence in a court of law. So you're running a little bit of a gamble by not having a music license if you're pushing music into the public domain.
I know you've mentioned the website several times, but we just wanted to give you the opportunity. If you could tell our listeners where they can find out more information about ARVC, about yourself, what would be the best resource?
We have a dedicated team of membership staff that will help guide you through it. If you're not comfortable, you can just go and Google arvc.org and it'll take you to our homepage. And you will need your member ID number to get into the back side of it, but that's where our staff can help you. It's a very simple sign-in process. It's password protected. And once you have those credentials, you get in behind the firewall and see all the things that are available to you, and your eyes will pop. It's just convincing members who are very busy work people. I get that. But convincing them to do this step so they can see for themselves what lies out there to help them operate their business. We have a great tool called a benefit calculator, and you plug in certain inputs as to the kind of things you use, whether it's a John Deere tractor or 10 gallons of paint, whatever. And it will calculate your savings for you if you use the ARVC program. And so many times our members say, wow, I pay X in membership dues each year, but I saved 10 or 20 times that just by using one or two of our benefits.
That's great.
Yeah, that's my plug. I'm really not plugging ARVC as much as I'm suggesting strongly that our members use the resources that are available to them that we've created. So hopefully you're
and really quickly, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong. There's different types of ARVC memberships, not only for campground owners, but for aspiring owners, vendors. Is that correct?
Yes. For $300 a year, you can be what we call a prospective owner. And that's set up for the person that is either thinking about getting into the campground industry, or maybe they just joined but really weren't ready to take the solid leap into full membership. They can be a prospective member for that fee. And we do prospective owner workshops throughout the year that engage them and show them how to take the bold step to being a full-time campground owner and member of ARVC. So you don't have to leap in overnight. You can walk before you run. And that's what that's intended to do. We also have vendors as part of our supplier council, about 150 of them that are considered a membership category as well.
Great. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Paul. The information that you were able to share today has been extremely insightful, and we know with our audience of active investors, passive investors, and people just genuinely curious about campground, both from the ownership and the user side of things, I feel like there's been a lot covered here that I think everyone's going to walk away with some great value. So appreciate the time, and we are excited to continue to pour into ARVC as members and get the value out of the membership as a whole, and just see where the industry takes us.
Well, thanks for having me. It's always good to be able to channel the messaging out to people that can use it, and I really enjoyed it. Appreciate it.
Excellent.
Thank you, Paul.
All right, thanks a lot. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Requity Insights, hosted by our team at the Requity Group. You can find recordings of all shows along with our opt-in form to set up a call and view future investment offerings on our company website, therequitygroup.com, also listed in the show notes.